Hello, Michaela. Michaela, can you hear me? Good evening. Don't forget to sign in to the chat. Of course, saying good evening is enough because it got your full name there, but um, all right. So do you have any questions for me before we get like into the actual looking at the study material and the study guide? Just giving some people a little bit of time to get in here. It is about 2 minutes after 7. Do you have any questions? Um, there's no specific formula or formula like format for the papers, but generally, I think you should have at least three things that you're comparing between the two of them. And I think the most logical way is to take it like one thing at a time. Like let's say value and then compare the two, say in this painting we see this and we see this and we see this in terms of the use of value. And then in this painting we see that, do that like in one paragraph, a comparison on value, then a comparison on a different topic like scale, and then a comparison on a different topic, and then kind of like a little bit of a wrap up of how all these relate, and then into the conclusion. You should have an intro paragraph and a conclusion paragraph. And but like the some people have done it slightly differently, and that's fine. Like some people tend to like some people split it up and have like a paragraph on two or three topics, but just on the one painting, and then another paragraph on two or three different topics on the other painting, and then a paragraph about how those then relate to how they're different from each other. So there are other kind of structure ways you could do it, but I think the for most people, the most successful, the most logical way would be, your body paragraphs are per topic, a comparison between the two paintings. So like whichever topics you pick, value, line, scale, hierarchy and emphasis. You pick a topic, you compare the two paintings in terms of those. You start with one painting, and it's logical to always kind of like if you start with the Rubens each time. That way we're used to that as a structure. Um, that would be my recommendation. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. Well, it doesn't look like there's anybody here right now besides the two of us. So I was thinking we could either start by looking at the study guide in terms of let's go to share. Here we are. There we are. We could look at the study guide in terms of the written material, or we could start with the artwork. I was thinking we could start with the artwork and just kind of go over what are the extra pieces of information you could say about each work and go from there. Um, but a lot of it, I mean, you're here, so like if you have, well, let me ask you this first, Michaela. Have you looked at the study guide for the midterms yet? Michaela, did you hear me? You've skimmed through it. Okay. So do you have any like, because if you have like some questions that are like, there was a question on the study guide, and I don't know the answer to it, I could address that really fast. But if you don't, then probably the best use of our time would be for me to go through the images and just kind of talk about what are some of the other things you can say about each one of the images that can help earn you more points on the test. So do you have any specific questions about the written part of the study guide? Okay. All right. Well, then let's just look at the images of the artwork. Um, I'm gonna minimize the chat. So if there's something that I say and you have like a follow-up question, you're gonna need to actually turn your mic on for a second and speak up so that I know that you have a question. Um, okay, so starting with excavation, right? I mean, like the basics we know already. We know the title, we know the name of the artist, we know the dates. We can definitely earn that extra point just right off the bat because it's a painting. It is an oil painting. Um, and we could earn an extra credit point by the fact that we also know that it's an example of abstract expressionism. It's an early piece of abstract expressionism and kind of early-ish in de Kooning's body of work. Um, so far we've got painting, oil painting, abstract expressionist, and the other things that we've talked, well, one of the things about this painting that I'm not sure I mentioned in any of the lectures this time around, but on this particular painting, the one of the reasons why it's called excavation is because at a certain stage in the process, he got frustrated with it and he scraped it down, right? And like just kind of like with his palette knife, just kind of scraped it. And so a lot of these little blips of color that are showing through are from those deeper layers where he's kind of scraped back to them. And so there is literally a sense of this painting being kind of archaeological in the sense that he worked on it for a while, a number of layers, then got frustrated with it, then scraped the whole thing down, found these old layers, and then built this new painting where those old layers are just kind of peeking through. Um, and so that would, if you could kind of like explain that about the process of this and how that led to this kind of body of work, like this painting is very much related to Attic and a couple of other paintings from this time period. And and then the other thing I would say is that one of the main things we talked about with this painting was about how it really it it is hard. It's hard for our eyes to find the hierarchy. Like it really pushes our kind of like our boundaries of what is hierarchy because it just feels so kind of like overall. But when you give it enough time, you start to see how everything starts to pull together and that there is a structure and an organization and an order there. Okay. So that would be one. Okay. So LG to the Spanish Republic. So we've got the title, we've got the artist, we've got the date. Um, it is a painting. This particular, the thing about Motherwell is that he did a lot of paintings, both as oil paintings and also did them in acrylic versions. And I have not yet gotten direct confirmation as to this particular version of Elegy for Spanish Republic, because he certainly did some that were fully in oil, and he certainly did some that were in acrylic. I'm not sure which one it is. I do know it's painting, but I cannot be certain. But the fact that we got a lot of the raw canvas seems to me to be possibly an indication that it's an acrylic painting. But you can paint on raw canvas with oil paints if you gesso the canvas with rabbit skin glue. So that's a possibility. Okay. What else have we talked about with this painting besides? So we talked about how the word elegy means like a poem for the dead, like a poem that you would say at a funeral, right? Like similar root to the word eulogy. and how it's about the Spanish Republic, which was a brief period in Spain before the Spanish Civil War, where Spain no longer had a monarchy and had a republic, but that ended and eventually was killed by the Civil War and by the fascists who won the Civil War, led by Franco. What else do we talk about this? We talked about how it's a good example of figure ground relationships, right? Um, and we talked about how it's kind of how it's for me, it represents one of the boundaries of representation, which is it looks completely like a non-representational painting. But when you think about the fact that Motherwell was making this kind of image, an image is very much based off of this again and again and again, all on the theme of elegy for the Spanish Republic, that this image must mean something to him. So in that way, it is a representation, right? It's a representation of the war, of the end of the Republic, of the tragedy of it. Okay, Portrait of Paganini. For one thing, we have like two pieces of content in the um right there in the notes, right? Which is that it is a pencil drawing. Remember that pencil drawing was actually kind of rare this time. Pencils as art tools were just, had only been invented 50 years before. Graphite, making graphite function as a drawing tool didn't, happen immediately in human history. But it's a graphite drawing, a pencil drawing, and it's primarily a line drawing. We talked about how there's a lot of change of line weight, very fluid, very beautiful changes of line weight. How, although it's primarily a line drawing, it does have tone, how the choices of tone draw your attention to certain areas. It's a portrait of a famous violinist, Paganini, who was at the time pretty much the most famous musician in Europe. So that's quite a bit. The bust of Queen Nefertiti. Um, And so we already have some information, limestone and stucco, that it's a sculpture, it's freestanding, so it's not any kind of relief sculpture, it doesn't count as relief, it's freestanding. That is comes from the Amarna period, right? The Nefertiti was the wife of Akhenaten, and that most likely we know it was found in a working kind of sculpture studio and in a workshop, and this was most likely a piece made to be kind of like a reference photo, right, for the sculptors so that they had something to look at when they needed to make the official portraits of Nefertiti. That wound up being louder than if you did it quickly. All right. Dying Lioness. So the Dying Lioness is part of a much larger piece called the Wall Friezes of the Ashurbanipal, right? There's both the the lion hunting scenes is half of them, and the other half is Ashurbanipal at war. And so it is, let's see, pretty sure it's relief sculpture. It counts as low relief. It's carved limestone. Probably was painted. I'm pretty sure it was originally, but now it's completely clean. And it was located at the Palace of Ashurbanipal, and which is in Nineveh. So it's today located at the British Museum. So that's a lot of pieces of information right there. And we have talked about it a bit, and we'll talk about it more. The main last thing I want to talk about is um, how it relates to the fact that like we can't separate as viewers, we can't separate our point of view from our perception of the work, right? Like we look at this and it just automatically looks like a work of empathy and sympathy, right? That like this lioness dying, she feels tragic, heroic, and it feels like just such a great, awful. It's like a beautiful scene in a movie, right? That we would tear up at as she's dragging herself across to get towards her mate, who is also dying. And she's dragging herself because the arrows went through her spine. So her limbs for the back half of her body are paralyzed. It's, but for all we know, the people who made this and the people who enjoyed it, they didn't see any of that. They might have laughed, aha, they might have been like just amused at it. Okay, Achilles and Ajax Amphora. So Exekias, it is a Greek ceramics piece. In terms of ceramics, this is a type of terracotta, right? It's red clay. In terms of Greek ceramics, this is an example of a black figure. And it's a really good example of proving something that students are constantly confused about I get so many times students will write on the essay part where they're like, explain the transition from red figure to black figure or black figure to red figure. And they'll say that black figure, the older one, was abandoned because, with red figure, because you could paint the details with your brush, you could get a lot more details. And in fact, it's the opposite. Like the main advantage black figure had was that you could be very detailed with it because you could make these really thin inscribed lines with the stylus much more. Now, the lines are tighter, right? Because they're scratch lines. They don't have the same fluidity and flow that a painted line has, but they are way more detailed, right? Than anything you could ever do with the tiniest of brushes. So like I said, the one thing that Black Figure has in his favor is the ability to. Now, a lot of Black Figure isn't as incredibly detailed as this is, but like if you look at those cloths and like think about the fact that someone came in and sized away every one of those lines, it's really amazing. Anything else about it? Oh, and the scene it's describing is from the Iliad, right? And it's a scene where Achilles and Ajax, these two heroes, are just about to go into battle. Like the battle they're just waiting on it, right? Like it's soon, right? And so they're bored, so they're playing a game of dice to just kind of amuse themselves and it's kind of like symbolic of the idea of like this is how true warriors, true heroes would face death, which is like, well, let's play a game. Okay, The Raft of Medusa by Jericho. So, number one, it's an oil painting, so it's painting, we know the medium. Two, it is from the Romantic period, right? And Jericho was kind of an early French Romantic painter, but died young. Three, it is based off of a real event that happened and was covered in the news, was in the French news, and was a big scandal. And then Jericho made this painting based off of that scandal. And I won't go into all the details as to why it was a big scandal. When he made this painting, in order to make this painting, he recreated the raft in his studio. He made this raft that we're looking at, he made that platform in his studio. And then he hired models, multiple models to pose, but he generally had them pose like one at a time. So, like, we know for some of these, like this guy here and that guy there, and I think also maybe that guy are all the same guy, right? It's like it's the same model, just in different places in the painting. And we're pretty sure like this guy and that guy are the same guy, and probably also that guy. So he hired models and had them like just go to different parts and then like, all right, do this pose. And then he would do drawings and paintings based off of it. Okay, that's a lot so far. All right, Guernica. So let's see. We talked about Guernica. Well, let's start with okay, we know the name of the artist, the painting, and the date. It is a painting, so we have that fourth item all ready to go. And I've talked about it for a number of issues. It came up a little bit on Figure Ground because there's some play between positive and negative going on in the painting. I also talked about it when we were talking about color palettes. And when I got to monochromatic color palettes, this is a great example of a monochromatic and almost completely kind of like colorless um, color palette. It's not totally colorless, right? Because although it's all in grays, there's a lot of change from warm grays to cool grays, as well as changes of values of gray. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's like a completely black and white image, right? Like if we took a black and white photograph of this, it would look a little bit different than what we have here. Like you can, to give you an example, like that color gray color is way cooler, almost kind of like a blue violet compared to like these grays, which are so warm, they're kind of sepia toned. One of the things about the gray tones of this painting is that Picasso talked about how it was to a degree a reference to the newspapers because that's how he was getting news of the war, right? He was in America at the time, an exile from Spain, where the Civil War was going on and where his people were dying, and he was reading it in the newspaper. And so that's why we have like these textures right there are also kind of referencing sort of newspaper textures. And and then lastly, it's like what is the painting about? It's about the bombing of this village named Guernica, and it's a village that was not that far away from where Picasso grew up, and it was just an awful tragedy, like often happens in wars. And when and like all it, the the fascists came in and they bombed it to almost nothing, and the old people, the women, the children were um like casualties. And so Picasso made this painting out of a sense of protest. Okay. All right. St. Francis in Ecstasy by Bellini, 1480. So one thing also we could say about this painting in terms of time period, we could say that Guernica it's a modernist painting. It's from the modernist period, right? Um, and it is I would call it post-cubism, right? Because Picasso was a cubist earlier and had like went through various cubist stages, but here it's kind of like you can see the influence of that kind of cubism thinking, but it's going past that. It's in a new direction. So maybe post-cubism would be a good way to describe it. Okay, St. Francis in Ecstasy. So it's painting. It is a Renaissance painting. It's from the High Renaissance, this same time period. Pretty much, Bellini was painting pretty much exactly at the same time as Leonardo was, and it's Venetian, meaning it's from Venice. Bellini was one of the great painters of Venice. And I just recently talked about how in the lecture on composition and page structure, how the geometry of the page, the corner to corner diagonals, how they kind of tell the story of the painting, like the way that corner to corner arc diagonal, it goes through these arcs here, like the way they make almost like a bow shooting the arrow of the diagonal goes right to his chest, and it tells the story. Oh, and then lastly, it's about St. Francis. So St. Francis, and it tells us one of the things it tells us is how St. Francis gave up a life of power and of wealth, right? We can see the things that he has left behind. We can see the town, the city, and the castle, the castle representing power and nobility, and the town representing wealth and, you know, an active life with people, and he left all those things behind to go to the wilderness to try to kind of like come to a deeper understanding and a connection with God. So there you go. That's a lot. Okay, La Meninas. I've talked a lot about this painting in a number of lectures, so hopefully you get some. So what do we know right off the bat? It's painting, it's an oil painting, it's Spanish, it's Baroque. Velasquez is there's a portrait of Velasquez in the painting. So he's in this painting, this painting. So he's like painting himself, painting the painting we're looking at, kind of thing. Only maybe not. We can't tell. Is he working on the painting we're actually looking at, or is he working on a different, really large painting? And the name of the painting, La Meninas, refers specifically to these two young women, the maids of honor, the two maids who are the attendants to the young princess. Um, and they're here, right? The princess is standing there because they're all there to kind of amuse us because we're sort of standing in the position of the king and the queen. You can see their reflections in the mirror back there. Okay. And I think that's enough. All right, Donatello's David. So it is sculpture, it's freestanding, it's cast bronze, it's in the round, and what else? And it's Renaissance, um, technically early Renaissance. Donatello is one of those kind of cusp figures where he's technically in the early Renaissance, but we often feel like he's from the late Renaissance, um, or the high Renaissance. And what else? So it's often said, and no one has yet, I haven't seen any disproof of this. It's often said that this was the first freestanding cast bronze figurative sculpture since antiquity. Like after the fall of Rome, no one was making these kind of statues, a cast bronze standing. Um, oh, and here's another thing. It's a great example of contrapposto. So we got a whole bunch of things that we can have in there, right? To say what's going on. And how many more do we have? Okay, Portrait of Ross. And so in the Portrait of Ross, we have well, first of all, it's an installation. So we actually already have that written right in the assignment of the piece. It's an installation. And really, like to get some extra points beyond that, you kind of have to just describe how the installation works, how it's a pile of candy, the visitors come up, right? The sign tells you everyone's supposed to take just one piece of candy. You take your one piece of candy as you're kind of like walking away, you read the next sign that tells you that the piece is designed to function like a clock to count down on time. By the time the pile of candy is down to nothing, it is estimated that Ross will be dead, right? And so counting out how much time Ross has to live. And it's an amazing piece. And there we have Parthenon. And so let's see, what are the things? There's so many things we could say about the Parthenon. So we've got the artists, we've got the date. We already know that it's in Athens, Greece. It's on top of the part of Athens called the Acropolis, which is the small hill in the center of Athens. And were a number of temples all on the top of the Acropolis, but the Parthenon was the largest and the topmost, right? Um, the name Parthenon means Temple of the Maidens. It is a temple of Athena, right? Which makes sense because Athena was the patron goddess of Athens, right? That's where the name Athens comes from Athena. You may not have known that. And it's an example of Doric sculpture, right? So we got Doric columns, and like a Doric architecture, like a all Doric architecture, it's got, or not all, but most, on the outside frieze, it has metopes and triglyphs. It had pediment sculptures. Pediment sculptures are no longer there, or mostly no longer there. Most of them are at the British Museum in London. Why is it damaged? It was actually an amazingly built building that was held together really well. Why is it damaged? It was damaged because in a war between, um, I don't know, somewhere in Turkey, there was a war going on, and they housed all the munitions, like all the explosives and stuff, in the middle of the temple, thinking no one would attack the temple. And I think it was the Venetians. It was probably a war between the Byzantines and the Venetians. That's most likely what happened. Anyway, they hit the temple, which was by that time was actually a church, but still they hit it. It exploded all the munitions on the inside, basically just exploded the roof off the building. Otherwise, it would be standing perfectly the same as when it had been, or mostly the same as when it had been built, but people blew it up, which is a shame. Um, all right. So, The Lamentation by Giotto. It's from the Scrivani Chapel. First off, it's a painting. It's an example of fresco. So it's not an oil painting. It's a fresco painting. You could get another point by explaining what fresco is. Fresco is painting into damp or slightly wet plaster, and then the paint soaks into the plaster. And we talked about the geometry of the page and how it leads our eye to here and to here. And you could talk about, oh, so since it's Giotto, it's from this period, which we call kind of like the Proto-Renaissance or the late Gothic in Italy. And anything else? I don't know. I've got some good stories about Giotto, but they don't relate exactly to this particular fresco. And that should be enough. Okay, so this is kind of a new one, right? Judith and her maidservants, Gentileschi, right? So this is an oil painting. It's from the Baroque, so Italian Baroque, because Gentileschi was Italian. Although Gentileschi, like Rubens, traveled all over Europe and was pretty successful selling artwork all over Europe. And what else? It's a great example of tenebrism. Like you can really, in this painting, see the influence of Caravaggio on Gentileschi. And this particular theme of the beheading of Holofernes was a particular favorite of hers, was very popular with some patrons. She did a number of paintings on this particular topic. And this is from the book Judith, which is in the Bible and well, in some Bibles, and depending on whether your Bible has the Apocrypha or not. And anything else I want to say about it? I think that's about it. All right. There are also some extra credit ones, and I'm not going to say all the things about them, but just to let you know, yeah, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, that's a good one. Maybe I'll put that as a Flaying of Marsyas by Titian. That's an amazing painting. Image of Infant Dionysus, Sharp Cathedral. That's a got a possibility. There's a possibility. There's a strong possibility that either the Caravaggio Entombment of Christ or the Gentileschi painting, one or the other, is going to be used in one of the comparison questions, like the comparison on value. I'm pretty sure actually that there might also be the other one that's in the comparison might be like a print, probably a Durer print. And I don't know, are there any others that are really important to mention? I think we all know enough about Palamnomer that if it shows up as an extra credit, you guys will have a lot you could say. All right. Michaela, do you have any questions for me? I'm going to pull up chat so you could. Okay, you don't? All right. So do you feel good? Do you feel ready for now you have a little bit of extra time because it opens at 8:30 tonight, but it will remain open until midnight on Sunday. Okay, so you have like an extra day, and I'm kind of like I gave a little bit of an extension on the homework assignments that were going to be due tonight, been shifted, and then also the ones that are due on Sunday have been shifted. So everything's been shifted about a day, partially to help everyone out, make sure we all have enough time to get this stuff done. All right, is there anything else you want covered? Okay, all right. Well, if you feel good, then we can end here. And remember, just send me an email if any questions pop up. Okay? All right, we're gonna end it. All right, you have a good night.